there, I'm Rose Jordan with Visit Mineral Wells, and this is David Owens with Lake Mineral Wells State Park. David is famous for bringing the state park to life with all kinds of fun activities like wildflower walks and stargazing and wilderness survival. And this evening, we're going to get a taste of the cowboy lifestyle as David shares his cowboy stories and poetry. So, David, how long have you been doing this program and where did you get the idea for it?
Oh, I've been doing this program since '96, and I started doing this at another state park. How I got an idea is a friend of mine does cowboy music, and when I had him doing music for the campers, and I would sit back and relax, and then he did a poem. And I thought I can do a poem. And so I started doing cowboy poetry along with his music, and that's kind of how it started.
Okay, so I hope you have your s'mores ready. I'm going to go back there and toast some marshmallows. David, it's all yours.
Okay, well, welcome to Lake Mineral Wells State Park. We have a lot of nature out here in the park having to do with the cross timbers of Texas. We're right in the middle of the cross timbers of Texas. It's an eco-region that our park represents, and we like to have people know more about that. Of course, we do a lot of nature programs out here, but we also do some history programs. And so because the cowboy lifestyle is a big part of Texas history, it's also a big part of the history here at the park and in the areas around the park. So we do this program on the importance of the cowboy in this part of the world, and the importance of the cowboy in general, bringing cattle out of the state of Texas and money back into the economy of Texas, and also feeding the rest of the country after the Civil War. We had a lot of hamburgers running around here in Texas back then, and we got them on cattle drives to ship to the east where it was war-torn. And so we like to preserve this history by doing this, and we're going to tell a few stories, and we're going to do cowboy poetry to kind of help you relate to the cowboy and learn a little bit about the cowboy lifestyle and preserve this history. So I always like to start out with one that compares the cowboy life to the modern day life. Anybody commute to work out there? Have to go and drive to work? Yeah, well, this particular one is called commuting. There's nothing like the feeling that you get down deep inside when you trot out in the morning and you've hired out to ride and your mount's enthusiastic. The air is crisp and new, and there's lively conversation going on amongst the crew. There's some bridle crickets chirping, jingle bobs tap out a tune. On one side the sun is rising and ahead there sets the moon. Shadows high-trod there beside you, elongated, keeping pace, reassuring you ain't hobbled by restrictive time or space. Up ahead, the boss is posting to the same beat as the song. It's then the realization hits you. You're right where you belong. It's then you start appreciating you're on trails where few have trod, and you wonder how you ever doubted if there really is a God. Top of ridge the boss reins in, so we gather up around it. From here he'll call the circle, so we step off to the ground, loosen up the latigo and air our ponies back, rearrange again our blankets and realign our cack. We mount back up to get dropped off, check to see who's on each side. You're glad that you're a cowboy and you feel a twinge of pride. You eat breakfast by the coalman, hurry around to beat the sun. You've 11 miles behind you, but it's here the work's begun. Now in town, when folks must travel to their workplace every day, it's said that they're commuting to their job to earn their pay. They choke in crazy traffic jams, fight for seats on bus or train. It's a wonder that this ritual doesn't drive them all insane. But we too commute to work, I guess, as the job at hand dictates. But we commune while we're commuting, and what a difference that makes. Well, there's several aspects to cowboy history. You have the ranch back at home, right? You have the cattle drive, which made the cowboy famous, that drove cattle from one place to another where the railheads are, or where there's better market to sell the cattle. And so that made the cowboy famous as well. But we're going to start back at the ranch, because life at the ranch is where they spent most of their time taking care of the cattle on the ranch. There's a thing that happens in the spring and in the fall. They have a roundup, and they round up all the cattle, get them all separated by brand, because they were all roaming and feeding together back in those days. No fences. Get them all separated, count them up, make sure they were all there. And this story happens to be a story about a roundup, but one cow that didn't show up. They knew about, but wasn't there. So they had to go looking for this cow. Now, I hope you guys are not having supper, because this one let's just say it's very descriptive. Well, I reckon there's worse that makes a cowpuncher curse, and I reckon it's happened to us all, though it's been years since, you can bet. As I think of it yet, it still makes my old innards crawl. I was making a ride to bring in one hide that hadn't showed up in the gather. I was riding up this stream, just daydreaming a dream, when I caught, there's something the matter. Near some old mesquite trees, I caught in the breeze a stench that was raunchy and mean. And seeing as how it might be that old cow, well, I rode up to a bend in that stream. Sure enough, cow lied in the creek there and died. Hard telling how long she'd been there. See, she was bloated and tight. It was a horrible sight. She was oozing and slipping her hair. Her eye sockets were alive with these maggots that thrive on dead flesh, putrid yellow and green, and the hot sun burning down, turning pink things to brown, and spewing this all that gunk out into the stream. Whew. I spurred upwind fast to get away from the blast of the heavy stench the cow made. Then I felt bad, seeing how that I lost the old cow. So I rode up to a tree in the shade. Then I got sick to the core, just thinking minutes before I had done something that made me feel worse. Not 30 yards down, I had stepped off to the ground and drank till my belly near burst. Oh, for months after it, just the thought made me spit, and I'd live it over like a bad dream. But the moral, I think, is if you must take a drink, never ever remount and ride upstream. Well, there's one that was kind of like a lesson. Maybe an older cowboy told a younger cowboy through this story that, hey, there's a moral to this. You know, there's lessons to be learned, and a lot of these had lessons to learn. Well, they would gather up at a certain time of year, they'd gather up the cattle, and they would, back in after the Civil War was over with, they'd gather up the cattle and they would take them on a cattle drive up to the railheads, because they could get top dollar in Kansas up at the railheads, and they'd put them on a rail, send them east, and feed this country. Back then it was war-torn. And so during that time of the cattle drives, moving them from here to there, well, you moved 2,000 to 3,000 head of cattle with about a dozen cowboys, a cook and a trail boss, and several other people that were on along, and move them up there about 10, 15 miles a day. Can't wear them out. Then you have to stay all night, and it'd take months to get them there. Well, there are stories that are being told around the campfire after the day was done, and there's one story about a horse. Actually, it's about a stranger and a horse. And some people say this is a true story, but I'm not so sure whether it is or not. But I know the guy, and you know the guy who wrote it too. Everybody's heard of this guy. His name's Anonymous. Y'all ever heard of that guy? Yeah, I thought you may have. But they say it's a true story, but I don't know. This is what happened on a cattle drive at a camp right before the sun went down. We were camped out on the plains at the head of the Cimarron when along come this stranger, and he stopped to argue some. He looked so kind of foolish. We began to look around. We thought he was a greenhorn that just escaped from town. We asked if he'd had breakfast. He hadn't had a sniff. So we opened up the chuck box, told him, help yourself. He took a cup of coffee, some biscuits, and some beans, and then began to talk about the foreign kings and queens. Talked about the Spanish War and fighting on the seas with guns as big as beef steers and ramrods as big as trees. He talked about old Paul Jones, a fighting son of a gun, said he was the grittiest cuss to ever pull a gun. Such an educated fella, his thoughts just came in herds, and he astonished all the punchers with his jaw-breaking words. He just kept on a-talking till he made the boys all sick, and they began to look around to see how they could play a trick. He said he lost his job out on the Santa Fe. He was going across the plains to strike the 7D. Didn't say how come it, just some trouble with the boss. Said he'd like to borrow a nice fresh saddle horse. Well, this tickled all the boys to death. They laughed down in their sleeves. They said, you can have a horse just as fresh as you please. So Shorty grabbed the lasso and he roped the zebra dun. Led him to the stranger while they waited for the fun. See, old Dunny was an outlaw. He had grown so awful wild while he could paw the white out of the moon, ever jumped for a mile. But he always stood right still, just like he didn't know, until he was saddled and ready for the go. When that stranger hit that saddle, old Dunny quit the earth. He jumped straight up in the air for all that he was worth, a-bawling and a-squalling and having wall-eyed fits with his hind feet perpendicular and his front ones in the bits. Why, you could see the tops of trees beneath him ever jump. But that stranger, he just growed there like a camel's hump. He sat up there upon him and he curled his black mustache like someone waiting for the hash. He thumped him in the shoulder, spurred him when he whirled. He showed us flunky punchers he's the wolf of this old world. And when he had dismounted once again upon the ground, we knew he was a thoroughbred and not some gent from town. Well, the boss, he was standing and watching all this show. He walks right up to him, asked him not to go. If you can use the lasso like you rode that zebra dun, then you're the man I've looked for ever since year one. Well, he could use the lasso, and he didn't do it slow. And when the cattle lay stampeded, he was always on the go. There's one thing, and a sure thing, I've learned since I was born. Every educated feller ain't a plumb greenhorn. Well, all right, so that little story might have happened out there on the range during a cattle drive like that. Stranger comes into camp. You don't get to see too many people on a cattle drive out in the country like that. So that kind of a story right there would be remembered and wrote down, or maybe not wrote down, but remembered. Eventually it got wrote down. And then sometimes there would be times around the campfire at night when the sun went down that they would tell, this is the only time they'd have time to tell stories or to have any kind of entertainment at all. And back then you could either watch the campfire or listen to somebody tell a story. That was about it. Or you could listen to the song somebody was singing out there on night guard. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But telling stories was about all there was to it. And so this particular story has to do with a fella somebody knew before. Y'all ever know anybody that has a little quirk? Somebody that's kind of abnormal? I think Willie Nelson said one time, well, I may not be normal, but nobody is. So everybody's got a little quirk. Well, this is a cowboy talking to the rest of the group about a fella he once knew. And you'll understand what I'm talking about. when you hear the first line of what this guy's little quirk was. See, they called him Pert Near Perkins, for unless that booger lied, he had pert near done most everything he had ever tried. He had pert near been a preacher. He had pert near roped a bear. He met up with Comanches once and pert near lost his hair. He had pert near caught the measles once. He had pert near broke his leg. He had pert near wed an heiress who had money by the keg. He had pert near been a trail boss, and according to his claim, he had pert near shot Bill Hickok, which had pert near won him fame. He had pert near stayed on a bronco that no other cowboy had ever stuck. Why, he was the man who had pert near drowned the duck. Now, all the boys on that lazy SB spread sort of took his words with a grin, let him fight his head, but one named Tom McGinnis sort of told it to him rough. He said, "You're working for an outfit now where pert near ain't enough. We tie our last ropes to the horn. What we catch, we hold. Pert near's one alibi we never do unfold. In fact, I'll tell you right now that no words I ever hear sound quite as plain blame useless as that little pair, pert near." That's how old Tom McGinnis laid her out on the line, like a heap of preaching talk. It sounded mighty fine, but one day while Tom McGinnis was a-riding off alone, he lamed his horse and had to take a neighbor's Nestor's roan to ride back to the ranch on. But somewhere along the way, them Nestors held him up, and there was the devil to pay. "I never stole a horse," Tom said, "I just borrowed it to ride." Them Nestors hated cowboys, and they told him that he lied. They took him for a horse thief. They had caught him with the goods, and they set out to hang him in a nearby patch of woods. They put a noose around his neck, throwed the rope for a limb, and Tom McGinnis pert near knowed this was the last of him. But suddenly some shots rang out from over top the hill, and them Nestors dropped their ropes and run like Nestors sometimes will when bullets go to whizzing. Old Tom's heart leapt up with hope to see old Pert Near Perkins riding toward him at a lope. "Looks like I pert near got here just in time," old Perkins said. "See them Nestors hang you." Tom's face turned kind of red. "You pert near did," he pert near grinned. "They pert near had me strung. You're looking at a cowboy who has pert near just been hung, and also one who's changed his mind. For no words ever said could sound as sweet as pert near when a man's been pert near dead." So there's one, just a story about somebody else they knew and something that happened. This is all on that trail drive. So they drive cattle all day, and then at night they have to stop, settle them down, and find a place for them to graze a little, because hey, you can't just run cattle living things. They have to eat, right? And they have to rest just like everybody else. And so they would calm them down in a place where there's water and in a place where there was good grass so they could graze, and they would bed it down for the night. So what happened on a cattle drive at night? So I'm going to do a few, little bit here. My voice will hold out. Let's see. I'm going to do a little bit here about what happened at night. At night on a cattle drive, there were kind of three groups. And people don't really realize there were kind of three groups. You had the cattle. They were out there trying to get them to bed down, and you had a night guard that would ride circles around the herd. Now, halfway through the night, another guard would come out and change places with him, and he'd go ride around the herd. Now, one thing for sure, everybody knows that, everybody's heard that singing cowboy came from Hollywood. Actually, cowboys sang as they were on night guard. And they did this for a purpose. Keep them awake, for one thing, to make sure the cattle understood that there was somebody out there with them, and calm them down, because that's one thing you wanted at night on a cattle drive, was calm. You wanted calm. You didn't want anything rattling around making those cattle run. So it'd calm them down, and it would drown out some of the sounds that may make them run, and it was an alarm system. So if I'm back at camp getting some sleep and I wake up and I can hear the night guard singing out there, everything's pretty much okay. Now if he's not singing, he may be working to keep them in and I may need to go help. But the song was a major part of the cattle drive. So you had the group out there, the cattle. Then you had a group that was by the Chuck Wagon and camp, basically. It was the camp, and all the cowboys sitting around telling stories and getting some sleep. Then you had one other that most people don't know about, and that is the remuda, because there was a whole herd of horses that came with them. Cowboy didn't ride the same horse every day, all day, every consecutive day. Couldn't do it. Horse would be wore out. So they had a string of horses for every cowboy. Yeah, 5 to 7 horses for every cowboy. Oh, well, man, you got a whole herd of horses that you have to take along with you. Now, there was a fellow called a wrangler that would take care of the horses herd. And so you had that group over there. Well, to get to a story, I'd like to start out by one of the songs that might have been sung back in those days. And it was a song that was sung, that was mentioned in this next poem. So out there in the cattle at night, there's an old song called Annie Laurie, and it's a Scottish song, and it goes, Max Weldon's braes are bonny, where early falls the dew, and 'twas there that Annie Laurie gave me her promise true, gave me her promise true, and ne'er forget will I, but for bonny Annie Laurie, I'd lay me down and die. So that was a song being sung out there in that group. Back at camp, everybody was asleep except for one cowboy. And this cowboy was up and he was homesick. And he should have been getting some rest, but he was thinking about home. And he says, don't know why I feel so restless. Moon shining big and bright. Cattle all are resting easy, but I can't sleep tonight. Ain't no cactus in my blankets. Don't know why they feel so hard. Unless it's Warbling Jim a-singing Annie Laurie out on guard. Annie Laurie, I wished he'd quit it. Couldn't sleep now if I tried. Makes the night seem big and lonesome. My throat feels sore inside. How my Annie used to sing it. Sounded good and gay on nights when I'd drive her home from dances when the east was turning gray. And her brow was like a snowdrift, and her eyes like quiet streams. And her face, I can still remember it much too frequent in my dreams. And her hand was soft and trembly that night underneath the tree when I couldn't help but tell her she meant all the world to me. But her folks said I was wild and restless, and unsettled. That's right. I leaned to punching cattle, and I'm at it still tonight. They say she married young Doc Wilkins. My Lord, but that was hard. Wish that fool would quit singing Annie Laurie out on guard. Just can't stand it thinking of the things we did back then. Good times past me now and never seem to come again. What? My turn? Yeah, I'll come a-running. Could you put me on some coffee, pard? At least I'll stop old Jim from singing Annie Laurie out on guard. So there was nighttime at the camp. and they were switching out, and he was the next in line to go out and take the cattle in by morning. But you know, the horses were over there too, and there was somebody that needed to take care of the horses. And so they had an older cowboy, kind of like the cook. The older cowboy would be hired to stay all night with the horses. And he would stay all night where the cattle night guards would switch out. He would stay all night. So he'd hear them off in the distance. He'd see back into camp, but he was with the horses. And they called that gentleman that stayed out there, they called him the old Nighthawk. And so this is a story by Bruce Kiskaden who tells the story of the old Nighthawk who was out there taking care of the horses. I'm up tonight, and the pinnacle's bold. Rim rocks tower high. The air is clear, the wind blows cold. There's only the horses and I. The valley swims in a silver sea. From the light of the big full moon, and strong and clear it comes to me, the lilt of the first guard's tune. The fire at camp burns big and bright. Old Ed the cook must have more wood than he needs. There'll be some wild stories told tonight of races and big stampedes. Well, I'm getting too old for that line of talk. The desperados they've knowed, their wonderful methods of handling stock, and fellers they've seen get throwed. What's that I see moving fast? It's a horse that's slipping through. He's trying to make it out that pass, come might near doing it too. Get back there. What are you trying to do? You hadn't a chance to bolt. Kid, I was wrangling the bunch like you before you was even a colt. Well, it's later now. The guard has changed. One voice is clear and strong. He's singing a tune from the old time range. I always did like that song. Takes me back to when I was young. Memories go through my head. The times when I heard that song sung or by voices long since dead. Yeah, I've traveled more than half my trail. Come way off down the further slope. I've seen my dreams and ambitions fail. My memories replace my hope. I guess it's true. Yeah, I guess it's true. I've heard it said that only the good die young. But tough old codgers like me and Ed must stay till the last dog's hung. I used to shrink when I thought of the past. Of all the things I've known, I took to drink. But now at last, I'd just rather be alone. You know, they better lay off that Wrangler kid. He's had just about enough. He looks like a partner that I had once did. You know, the kind you can't bluff. They're gonna find they're making a big mistake. They get him overhead. And they'll give him an even break, or I'm taking a hand, you bet. We'll look in the east. There's that morning star. It glows with a fiery glow. Looks like the end of a big cigar. Doesn't have far to go. And I can see in the east it's turning gray. They'll be gathering the horses soon. And faint down the valley far away, I hear the drone of the last guard's tomb. Well, I guess I got all the horses here. There's that T-bar blue, and there's that buckskin with one split ear. And yeah, I got them all. 92. Here comes that Wrangler boy with the rope. He never misses a throw. Will he make a cowboy? I sure hope. They'll give him half a show. Well, they're throwing the rope corral around. Those horses bunch in like sheep. Think I'll go swallow some breakfast down and try to forget sleep. Yeah, I've lived my life, took a chance, regardless of law or vow, played their game, had my dance. Guess I'm paying the fiddler now. So there's a thought of one of the lonesomest jobs that you could have out on the cattle drive. The night hawk, out there by himself all night long, taking care of the horses. So there's nighttime on the cattle drive out there. Let's see. I lost my time, so I guess I don't even know when I started. So let's see. Let's talk about wrapping this thing up a little bit. Now, I talked about, I kind of brought everybody down with those last ones, you know. They wanted to keep everything calm, and a guy who's thinking about home, and another guy who's in his last part of his years, and so let's bring it back up, okay? Let's do one about a feller named Jack Potter, okay? So this guy named Jack Potter was a good cowboy, and he had a talent. He knew how to do inventory. Well, they didn't call it that back then. They called it a tally. You had to count your cattle, make sure you had them all. You might have lost one in the creek. You know, we talked about that already, didn't we? So he was able to tally. He could count really well, Jack Potter. But there was one thing that he couldn't do very well, and that was talk to the ladies. So this is a poem about old Jack Potter and his little time with the one lady. Now, Jack Potter was a feller who knew the ways of steers, from the briars in their hairy tails to the ticks that chawed their ears. He was a Texan and a cowhand of the saddle-bred and born, and he could count a longhorn herd on the move and never miss a horn. That is, until on a tally in 1884, he started acting dreamy, and he really missed the score. Well, the old man knew the symptoms, said, "Jack, you can't work like this. I'll give you 10 days to just go find out what's amiss." Well, amiss was just what was ailing him. He had fell in love for sure with a gal named Cordy Eddy, mighty pretty, sweet and pure. Jack rode 100 miles just sweating with the thoughts of sweet some words to ask her with, like a feller ought. "I'm just a humble cowhand, Miss Cordy, if you please, but I ask for your heart and hand here on bended knees." Well, sounded mighty simple, thus rehearsed upon the trail, but when he got to Cordy's house, his words all seemed to fail. "Howdy, ma'am. How's the crops?" "Say, how's your ma and pa?" When it come to asking, why, he just weren't no good at all. So he took her to a dance one night, and the horse that she rode was his. "Oh, he's a mighty fine horse," Cordy would say, and Jack would say, "Yep, he is." Well, they rode home late that night. The moon was up and high, and Jack was talking about the stars up in the sky and how they would guide a cattle herd just like they guided seagoing ships. but words of love and marriage never crossed his lips. So he started talking about that horse, and he said, you can see he's fancy gaited, never fights his head. Oh, he's a mighty fine horse, Cordy'd say, and she heaved a big sigh. And Jack said, well, you can have him, that is, one day when I die. See, Jack was hoping she'd savvy what he meant, or maybe guess, and she'd say that word he'd longed to hear, namely, yes. But they made it to the ranch house, and Jack was wondering how he had ever popped the question, and he'd have to do it now, or wait and sweat and suffer till the work was done that fall. Then by then, he may lose her, and she'd be married after all. So Jack took her saddle and put it up in the barn, led his horse out to the gate. Said, well, ma'am, I guess I'll be going. It's getting mighty late. But her eyes, they shone like starlight, and her lips were like the flowers. Jack says, now this here horse, is he mine or is he ours? Oh, he's our horse, Cordy said, with a voice as soft as moss. Then Jack, he claims he kissed her, but she says he kissed that hoss. So there's one for you. I might bring you back up a little bit about a fellow who couldn't talk to the ladies very well, but I think now let's talk about this part of Texas. Let's talk about something that was on every cattle drive, starting with the Goodnight Loving Trail. Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving went on the first cattle drive to Denver from this area. About 10 miles from this park is where they met up and partnered up and started this. And so they established the Goodnight Loving Trail, and before they went, Charles Goodnight invented a thing that became a staple for every cattle drive from then on, called the Chuck Wagon. He invented the Chuck Wagon right here in Parker County. And so he put a little chuck box on the back end of a wagon, had a lid that folded up and folded down to make a table. It was a great invention. They're still using them on ranches today. But the Chuck Wagon, this next poem is about a Chuck Wagon, but it's also about a fellow named Colonel Slaughter, C.C. Slaughter, who lived over in Palo Pinto County, just north of what present-day Palo Pinto. He at one time had more cattle and more land, owned more land than anyone in the whole state of Texas. And so it starts out, this is his cattle drive that they were on this story. It's about the cook, it's about the Chuck Wagon, and it's about C.C. Slaughter's cattle that were on this drive. It's also about navigation. How in the world did they find their way? The old cook knew about it. And it goes, I hired out to Colonel Slaughter, pushing steers to Abilene, green and wet behind the ears, a kid of 17. Though I was raised in Texas, I was not a seasoned hand, so I got the job of hoodlum. Now that's the Coosie's right-hand man. On the Llano Estacado, all you see are endless plains. You dread the sound of thunder. There's no shelter from the rain. The Coosie would do a strange thing when the evening meal was done. He'd go out to the wagon and he'd move the wagon tongue. He'd say, son, there ain't no landmarks on these wide and rolling plains. Ain't no trees nor mountains, so each day it looks the same. But you'll never lose your direction, and you'll know just where you are if you always point your wagon tongue toward that old North Star. Now out beyond the Cimarron, cold and stormy night, we saw the cattle stampede in the lightning's eerie light. Took several days to round them up and get them settled down, and we followed in the wagon across the soft and muddy ground. As we moved the herd across the plains, we had no way to know that we had drifted off course towards New Mexico. But then, the night the stars came out, why, his theory stood the test. Abilene's up north of us, but we were headed west. And my life has been a full one. My hair is turning gray. And I've seen a lot of sunshine, but I've seen some cloudy days. There are times I wandered aimlessly and I still wear the scars when I didn't point my wagon tongue towards that old North Star. Because life is like a grassy sea. The trail ain't always plain. One may lead to pleasure while another leads to pain. But you'll never lose your direction. You'll know just where you are if you always point your wagon tongue to your own North Star. So that was one that kind of gives you an idea about navigation and the Chuck Wagon and the cook. I think I'll end it up here with a little song. And this takes us back to that Goodnight Loving Trail that was established from right here. A fellow named Utah Phillips wrote this song, and it's called the Goodnight Loving Trail, but it's about the cook. It's about the Coosie, the Cusinero. They got all kinds of names for the cook. In this song, they call him the old woman. So when you hear somebody saying the old woman in this song, they're talking about the cook. Okay? So let's see. It goes. Too old to wrangle or ride on the swing. You beat your triangle and you cuss everything. If dirt were a kingdom, then you'd be the king on the Goodnight Trail, on the loving trail. Our old woman's lonesome tonight. French harp, it moans like a low-ballin' calf. And it's a wonder the wind don't tear off your skin. Get in there, blow out your light. With the snake oil and herbs and your liniments too, you can do anything that a doctor can do, except find a cure for your own dadgum stew on the Goodnight Trail, on the loving trail. Our old woman's lonesome tonight. The French harp, it moans like a low-ballin' calf. And it's a wonder the wind don't tear off your skin. Get in there, blow out your light. Well, the fire's all out, the coffee's all gone. The boys are all up and they're breaking the dawn. And you're sitting there all lost in a song on the Goodnight Trail, on the loving trail. Our old woman's lonesome tonight. French harp, it moans like a low-ballin' calf. And it's a wonder the wind don't tear off your skin. Get in there and blow out your light. Well, I know that someday I'll be just the same, wearing an apron instead of a name. No one can change it, no one's to blame on the Goodnight Trail, on the loving trail. Our old woman's lonesome tonight. The French harp, it moans like a low-ballin' calf. And it's a wonder the wind don't tear off your skin. Get in there, blow out your light. Well, I hope y'all enjoyed the evening of Cowboy Stories, and I hope you gained a little appreciation for our Texas history and the cowboy. especially the ones right around here. Got some pretty famous ones around here. If you come out to the state park, maybe you can come on a night when we're doing a little cowboy poetry, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that stories of what happened around here. Come out to the park and enjoy the lake, enjoy maybe some rock climbing or hiking. But we welcome you out here to Mineral Wells and Lake Mineral Wells State Park. We'll see y'all down the trail.